Thanks for joining us today. My name's Michael, and I'll be moderating a panel today about custody best practices and options. I'm joined by 4 amazing panelists. We have Sarah, David, Dave, and Sujay. To get started, I'd like to just ask our panelists a very simple question, a list of 2. Now, there are many things that you need to be considering when looking for custody or control best practices and options. In your opinion, what are the 2 most important things? We'll dive in after your lists. Why don't you start, Sarah?
Sure, so I'll start. So you'll be surprised, since I'm an insurance person, that insurance is not the first thing I list, but the first thing actually is security. You really have to understand your point of failures, and then how you can control or limit that exposure is definitely number 1. Obviously, insurance is number 2. Insurance is a great form of consumer protection. If there's a loss, insurance in theory should kick in and kind of make your customers whole. It's also a great vetting process. You go through a third-party underwriting process, so insurance is number 2.
Dave?
I'd say that I'll echo what Sarah said, which is that security robustness is definitely number 1. If your keys aren't safe, then your funds aren't safe. But closely after that, for me, is probably user experience and developer tools, right? Because if you can't use the tool, and if your developers can't use the tool, then nobody's going to use the tool.
That's a great point. Thank you. Dave?
Yeah, so for me, everyone's so hyper-focused on the key management component of custody that I think that a lot of people don't pay enough attention to the authentication to the transaction request itself. So I think that's an area that I'm particularly focused on.
Verification, good. Sujay?
The luxury of going last. I echo with what people were saying, with security to me stands out. That's at the top of the list. The second one is being able to verify what they're saying, right? That to me is key.
Excellent. All right, so we've got the list of what the experts feel is important, and I noticed that amongst all of you, security is number 1. Now, obviously, security is a very large topic and has many, many smaller subtopics. So let's dive in a little bit there. Within security, there is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the holy trinity of security. When it comes to custody best practices, and let's say I'm a company and I have a lot of assets and I want to secure them well, and I'm looking for a vendor who can help secure them well. Obviously, security is my number 1 priority. What should I be looking at in a vendor to differentiate them between the others? Sujay, why don't we start with you?
So taking a step back, third-party risk management is a very traditional component. It's very existent in every company. All of us know about it. There are different standards that were put in place in order for companies to actually do proper verification or vetting of a vendor that is being brought on. When we think about third-party verification, especially from a security perspective, we think about the SOC 2 principles, right? And there is a lot of history behind SOC 2. Started off as SAS 70, then ISAE and SSAE, and then it eventually turned into SOC 2 with the 5 trust principles that are there. And coming into the current landscape of decentralized or cryptocurrency world, people try to apply the same principles for the industry, right? And it doesn't work. We go back and forth about these things. A lot of companies have their SOC 2 done, but the scope is very limited to the focused area of the traditional systems and how they are secured or managed. And so there has always been this need of knowing what other standards that are there that could help us. And the CCSS standard is one of those, right? And at Falcon, we do use CCSS for assessing some of the other vendors. There are a lot of conversations that go on around the standards, how they're being used. That's one standard that has come up that we continuously kind of trying to look at. There are still areas of improvement that can happen in that, but that is one of the comprehensive standards that we have started using a lot more internally when we do third-party reviews, especially for custody or crypto and blockchain-based companies.
On that note, I know that Halborn has a few different CCSSAs or CCSS auditors on your staff. To Sujay's point about security standards, How does Halborn manage those, and how do these standards come into play in your organization?
Halborn made the decision to put a lot of our employees, including myself, through the CCSSA certification. And the reason being is, we looked around and there wasn't any governing organization that was specifically hyper-focused on custody in and of itself. And we looked at the framework and we agreed with it, right? We're not just going to go out just to shill business and say, let's become certified auditors. We really believed in the framework. We looked through it, between level 1, level 2, level 3. It's a framework that I myself, even prior to, coming over to Halborn when I was at BNY Mellon, it's a framework that I adopted, even in of itself, like, again, not necessarily in its whole form at that time, whether or not it existed. It was just the design principles that, as a cybersecurity professional, these are the things that I particularly look for when I was evaluating, looking at custody providers.
Gotcha, thank you. David, you mentioned user experience earlier. Now, I take your point 100% that if, no matter how secure a platform or a web application is, if it is not easy to use for the average user, it's not going to be used correctly, and that's going to cause problems. So let me ask you, when it comes to the user experience related to security, what are the things that you would recommend are present, or what guiding principles would you have when it comes to the user experience of security applications?
The answer to that is going to depend on the application, right? So you have to do a little bit of requirement gathering before you dive into what the user experience is going to look like, because holding custody of assets that you're just sitting on is going to look a lot different than something you want to interact with programmatically, right? And the more tools you give folks to interact with their funds programmatically, the more you need to focus on the granularity of things like policies and control of the actions they're performing through that, right? So what does the user experience for that look like? I mean, as an engineering manager, when I have my engineers interact with a product, I don't want them clicking through menus, right? I want everything to be accessible through an API. I want them to provide good log feedback if something goes wrong with the action they're trying to perform, right? Things like this. And also, I want to be able to provide the security team with a way to control what we're doing in a way that makes sense to them. Ideally, also programmatically through an API, and something they can document and audit, right? And export to something like a SIM or something like that, right?
The user interface is a very important aspect. And Dave, you mentioned verification of transactions. In my mind, there are two pieces of it. There's the human side, then there's the computer side. Humans need to verify that I'm about to send this money to the right place, and the computer needs to verify. What are the different types of verification that you were alluding to earlier, and how would you recommend that user interfaces present these to users to make it easy?
Well, you threw a curveball at the end with the easy. I think
That's
just
true.
generally with security, there's always this balance between security versus convenience. To make things ultra convenient for users, just use OAuth. But then there's a question of, well, now you're outsourcing your identity access provider to to another entity. But I think the fundamental question is, it's where is the risk? So a lot of organizations are so focused on the protection of the key share material, but they're not necessarily taking the time and attention for, well, how am I authenticating a request that's coming in for the user? How do I know that the user is actually making this request? And there's a couple of different security techniques you can do, whether it's embedding digital signatures or he's using a signature in a secure enclave, or but at the end of the day, my advice is always, whatever you're getting programmatically, there has to be an out-of-band verification, and that's usually the human verification. But that's now become incredibly more difficult with the deep fakes and the ability to mirror people's voices. If everyone's aware, like the new iOS 17 that's coming out, a feature that's enabled in the device is in copying your voice, so that way that it can talk as you're typing. And that's going to be a feature that's going to be available for feature in a phone. So the technology, as the technology is becoming more readily available, the threat actors are picking up on it. So the threat actors are now able to mirror your face, mirror your voice, and it's becoming really incredibly difficult now to do this out-of-band verification. So I'm not going to sit here and purport to have the answer to it, but I think it's our jobs as security professionals is to bring awareness to these types of new, attack vectors. I don't think it's enough personally anymore just to throw up a webcam and just, have somebody verify that they are who they are and, throw up a driver's license, with, $500 in open source software, I can be anybody up on the stage and, purport to be them.
It's a very interesting point. A lot of people, when they want to verify something, they want to verify that I'm talking to the real Dave Schwed. They would say, hey, pop on a video camera. Let me just look at you as you're talking. And you're saying that that's no longer enough.
Yeah, 100%. I don't think that's long enough. I mean, you can just Google deepfakes, and you can watch people that are, Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg and the deepfake Tom Cruise that's all over social media. It's really, really easy to do it now, and I don't think we can rely on that video verification anymore.
It sounds like you're right. So far we've been talking about what you should do to prevent theft or to prevent bad things from happening, making sure the user interface is very easy for people to use, making sure that you're following standards to cover all the bases to prevent thefts from happening. But we all know that there's no such thing as 100% security. At some point, something will fail. And when that happens, you got to start picking up the pieces. So Sarah, I'd like to turn to you as our only panelist who's focusing on insurance, which is probably one of the most important, but also one of the least sung aspects of security, because insurance happens after something goes wrong. What are the things that we should be looking for when we're trying to vet a specific insurance provider for our secure systems?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So insurance definitely is so boring compared to what everyone else is talking about up here, but it's so necessary. All traditional companies have insurance, and we feel really strongly that insurance is so important to this space, especially as it continues to grow and develop. When it comes to vetting insurance carriers, I mean, there's a lot of things to look at. There are a number of insurance companies who actually really do understand the space or who are spending time to try to understand the space, and those will likely end up being your best partners. You really do want to find a carrier that you can grow with as your company develops. It is, unfortunately, it's a true rumor that insurance right now for companies in the digital asset ecosystem is relatively expensive. But as you continue to build those meaningful partnerships with the insurance companies, you'll see your premiums drop, your coverage is going to broaden. So you really look at an insurance carrier's understanding. You try to understand their financial strength. You want to make sure you're working with a carrier who is actually going to be around to pay claims, because insurers do pay claims. And you really just want to find that right 1, 2, 3 insurance companies that you know will help you as you continue to develop.
Gotcha, thank you. So that's a good way to choose an insurance carrier. You mentioned in your answer ways to reduce your insurance premiums. Let's say that we do have a platform that we want to secure, and we're following all these standards like the CCSS, and now we've found an insurance provider that we like to provide insurance. What tips would you provide to me on how to reduce those premiums to get the most bang for my buck?
So when you're working with a more traditional insurance company, they will absolutely look at your cybersecurity protocols. So the CCSS, as we talked about backstage, the certification it's an amazing opportunity. It's a great measurement tool for insurance companies to use. So they'll look at that. They'll look to see if you're SOC 2 Type 2 certified. So in order to try to reduce your premiums, if you can kind of check the box and show them things you've done that exemplifies that you really do take cybersecurity seriously, they will vet your cybersecurity system. They absolutely will. It's a very thorough vetting process, but it's incredibly helpful on the back end. Once they're comfortable with you, they will start to lower those premiums.
Gotcha, thank you.
Can I add something to it? When I was looking at other vendors in the space, I would ask them for insurance, because if the higher their insurance coverage is, or even having insurance coverage would basically mean that they have gone through a vetting process by someone who's willing to put their money on them, right? So that's another aspect that was also helpful when I looked at vendors and the insurance coverage that they had.
Yeah, and I just want to note, it's really important when you're vetting a potential partner vendor and you're looking at their insurance, it's important to understand what insurance they actually have, because some of it seems to be more beneficial than others. And you really want to understand, for example, like if they have custody insurance through the specie market, or if they have cyber/technology errors and omissions coverage, those are really thorough vetting processes versus some other coverages that really aren't.
Absolutely. And when it comes to cryptocurrency, I think cyber coverage is totally different. But theft, crime, and specie is where we used to focus mostly, and we continue to focus on that too.
There was a very interesting question that I heard Mr. Schwed ask that we didn't get a chance to get the answer, but I think the audience would benefit from hearing that question. David asked Sarah, in the case where a company has insurance, but then they make a security mistake. For example, they're not following one of the controls of the CCSS, and because they didn't do that thing, they lost money. Would the insurance pay out in that case? And if not, I guess where is the line between where the insurance would cover a security mistake by a company or where they wouldn't?
So mistakes happen all the time. So as long as it's not an intentional mistake, for the most part, most types of insurance should still kick in and pay a claim. If it's an intentional wrongdoing, that's a whole other story. But an insurance policy is a contract. And so as long as you live up to your end of what your contractual obligations are, insurance carriers will pay.
Gotcha, thank you. Let's switch tacks a little bit. One of the topics in the headline of this conversation is buy or build. As we know, there's almost an endless amount of vendors who are all trying to sell their service versus their competitors' services. And there's always the option of building something in-house. A proper operator's job is to decide when I should build something, when I should buy something. I'd like to ask an open question to our panelists. How do you define that line of when you should build something in-house and hire staff, or when you should adopt a service offered by a third party? Where's that line?
So when we think about buy versus build, it's more about what talent you have, whether you are experts in the area that you are trying to build or not, and then how much do you have to invest in it in order to maintain it? Because building is easy. Maintaining is the tough part, right? And continuing to invest into it in order to make sure that it is improved upon over a period of time is really important. So that's usually the criteria that we look at. And from an investment perspective, it's not just about the dollar value. It's about the talent. Can we retain the talent? How much do we invest in security? And what's the ROI? Do we get the ROI by building it? Or are there other players in the market that we could just buy from that would meet all of our criteria, right? And for either of these paths that are chosen, the most important thing is to understand what the criteria is that we're looking for, and whether we are capable of building it and maintaining it, or whether we should look for someone that is that has the capability of building it and continuing to maintain it. Right?
I think when it comes to custody, I think the answer is a little bit different than normal tech. I think because custody is so integral and foundational to everything you do with crypto, I would say most organizations are probably not apt to build it, and I think they should buy. I think the differentiators come when you come to large enterprise organizations, including some of the major banks, where they have the budget and they have the wherewithal and they have the expertise in order to go out and hire 50 to 100 people to go out and build something. If you look at some of the larger custody technology providers today, I mean, they're teams of 100, 200, 300, 400 people that have been doing this for years. So for a smaller organization to think that, well, let me just go out and hire a couple of full stack developers and I'm going to poof, buy a MPC library and throw up a custody solution, you're not going to equal this type of security that one of these large technology custody providers are out there. So I think it's really just more about reflection internally and just coming to the realization of, do I really want to go down the road of recreating what's already out there and has already been tested and isn't in the market?
Galaxy bought GK8, which is a custody solution, not too long ago. I obviously wasn't in the room for those decisions, so I can't really speak to what went into the decision-making process there. But I would imagine that, if there is a company available on the market that you could buy, evaluating current market conditions and, whether, what kind of price tag that would come out would be a significant portion of that decision-making process. But I'll echo what Sujay said, which is, talent has a lot to do with that decision. You need to have the folks in-house. You need to have the people who have the know-how to build that custody solution. You don't want to just throw some, random collection of Rust developers at this kind of problem, because they'll run into the same problems and the same pitfalls that the folks who have already built these custody solutions ran into and tripped over and have solved at this point, right?
You bring up a great point, David. A lot of security problems have been solved, and unless you have someone on your staff who is aware of that solution, you won't be able to necessarily get that implemented in your system. So picking all the pieces of things that have already been solved and stitching them together for your system is the right way to go, and building the pieces that are missing is a good way to fill the gaps. But that's all for stuff that we know today. There's a variety of threats that are coming at us tomorrow, a variety of new systems, new technologies, new algorithms that are just on the horizon that will improve the security landscape. And there's also the threats that we have 0 days to handle, where some hacker in his mom's basement, he releases a piece of code that allows him to breach a system, and now suddenly everyone on the internet who knows where to look can use this exact same piece of code and break into all these systems, and these companies now have 0 days to patch it. So I have 2 questions for our panelists, and we can tackle them in any order that you guys want. How do you protect a company against, or protect your assets against these 0-day threats that you have 0 days to prepare for, number one? And number two, on the horizon, what are the security things coming out that you feel will help the constant battle against these hackers?
Well, obviously, there's not much that you can do proactively to, guard against 0 days. But there are things that you can prepare your company. There are ways that you can prepare your team and to respond to them quickly, right? So if you have the right processes in place, you have the right, processes defined, and you are confident that you can respond quickly, and you have an agile enough team to do that, then I think that's the best response to that, is just being prepared to move quickly, being prepared to take the correct actions to stop the bleeding and start working on that immediately, right? What those actions are going to depend, again, on your use case and how your product is being used. But if I was evaluating a custody solution based on their ability to respond to a 0-day, I would start looking at things like that.
That's a great piece of advice. You're absolutely right that we can't know in advance what these 0 days are, so we can't prepare in that way. But we can prepare the human element, all of our staff, all of our procedures. If they know that tomorrow there could be a very quick thing that we have to do, training the staff to deal with that fast-paced environment, to get a patch built and pushed out to production, that is something that we can do. That's a great answer. What other things are coming out in the future that we feel can improve the security landscape?
I think monitoring. I think that's an area today that there's not a lot of attention that's given to. You have standard security operations centers that exist in the Web 2 world. I haven't necessarily seen a Web3 security operations center like fully staffed like they do for Web 2. I think understanding like on-chain telemetry and understanding what are the IOCs, indications of compromise, or IOAs, indications of attack, look like in the Web 3 world. We'll see a lot of smart contract vulnerabilities or smart contract exploits, but that's just one myopic view of the threats that we're experiencing in Web 3. Looking at what is the social engineering attack pattern look like when it comes to Web3? Like if you're not familiar with it, I implore everybody to look at, the Axie Infinity hack. It was probably one of the more sophisticated social engineering attacks. And, training our staff, security awareness, everybody kind of rolls their eyes and just, puts it in the, and I'm sure everyone in the room does this, let me load up a browser and just lower the volume and just answer the questions at the end. But like actually perform security awareness training that will actually teach and actually inform people to recognize for these types of threat patterns. Because when you're dealing with nation states, they're not, pretending to call and pretending to be from Microsoft and telling you that, they're going to take control of your machine. These are well orchestrated, targeted, attacks against specific individuals within organizations that your technology tools are not going to pick up. You have to rely on people's, intuition and understanding that something doesn't seem right. So I think security awareness, I think, is also something that, I think is important. But, definitely security operation centers, to kind of look out for these types of threats.
To add to what David and Dave were saying, time to detection is really critical. Right? 0 days are the story of our lives. It's never going away. We have to live with it. The reason we are graying much faster is 0 days, right? So time to detection is extremely important, and putting in as many gates as possible for a hacker to get to your key jewels or the crown jewels is extremely important, right? The sooner you know that there is an issue, the sooner you're able to react to an incident or a zero-day vulnerability that is identified, the lower impact your organization is going to see. So that's absolutely key. And user awareness, I cannot re-emphasize enough on that. It's extremely important. And one of the things that I believe in, that I really like the way we do it at Falconex compared to some of the other previous companies, has been that people are willing to openly talk about the breaches and the hacks that are happening so everybody in the company can understand. It's not about creating fear, it's about creating awareness, right? And a lot of companies and a lot of people actually think of it the other way. They think of it like you're creating fear within the company. We don't want to talk about these issues in the company, right? So just explaining it, helping them understand what are the vulnerable things and how these attacks can happen, like how PDF readers can be weaponized. It's really, really powerful. And imparting that knowledge actually helps us secure them and their families as well. Because in crypto industry, we have seen that it's not just people that are in the industry that get attacked. Attackers will try to find a means to get to you, either through your friends or family, right? That's the nation-state attackers that we're talking about. So it's extremely important that that awareness is created amongst the whole company and is not limited to your tech or security teams.
And then just quickly on the back end, insurance is a really helpful tool if and when there is a hack. Insurance can help reimburse you as the custodian or your customers for the loss of assets. And we are trying really hard to keep the insurance markets current and up with what you as an ecosystem are doing. But insurance coverages are constantly evolving. And so what you can get from the markets today is very different than what you could have gotten from them 6 months ago. So if you don't have insurance, continue to talk to the markets because there's always something coming out that could potentially help you.
All these are great points. Sujay, I take to heart what you say about user education. In my previous role as Chief Information Security Officer at Shapeshift, we had a rigorous security training program where security wasn't just dealt by the security staff. Security was everybody's responsibility. So user education is very important. Thank you very much for the panelists, and thank you all in the audience.